You won't believe this, but she actually called the cops on me for fishing, just casting a line into a quiet lake on a Sunday morning. Apparently, that qualifies as suspicious activity if some woman with an authority complex decides you don't belong there. One minute I'm enjoying the kind of peace my grandfather always talked about, and the next I'm being accused of lurking near children and threatening the entire community, all while sitting right there on my own damn land. Spoiler alert, it was mine. The whole mess that followed involved fake violation notices, a makeshift HOA patrol squad that looked like it was gearing up for a private military operation, and one person who was so loud and so fundamentally wrong about everything that it made my morning coffee go cold. If you've ever dealt with a situation where pure ego trumped basic reality, drop your craziest moment in the comments because this story spirals fast, and when reality finally hit Tiffany Albright, trust me, it hit harder than a 20-pound Chinook on a dry fly. The mess started on a peaceful Sunday morning in early March. I'd been living in my grandfather's old lakeside cabin in Western Oregon for about 4 months now, ever since I inherited the property after he passed. I'm a remote software engineer, so moving out here was supposed to be the perfect antidote to city chaos and deadlines. My grandfather, Walter Nelson, always said this place was his sanctuary. The cabin sat right on the water, and every Sunday had become my ritual. Grab Walter's old rod, make a thermos of coffee, and head down to the water by 7 a.m. The lake was gorgeous in that early morning light, mist rising, birds calling, pure tranquility. Adjacent to my place was the Crescent Lake Preserve development, maybe 20 houses, but they seemed far enough away that we wouldn't bother each other. Or so I foolishly thought. I was sitting in my usual spot, coffee steaming, when I heard voices approaching, loud voices. I looked up to see a woman marching toward me, 2 nervous-looking figures trailing behind her. She was late 30s, blonde ponytail pulled tight, in expensive workout clothes that somehow looked tacky on her. The way she walked screamed, "I am the boss," and her voice carried across the water like she was addressing a stadium. "Excuse me," she yelled when she got within shouting distance. "What are you doing in our community recreation area?" I blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. This is my property. I inherited it from my grandfather, Walter Nelson." Her face immediately twisted into that perfect, tight look of contempt. She planted her hands on her hips. "Your property? This lake is shared community property for Crescent Lake Preserve residents only. You are trespassing on private property." My patience started to thin, but I kept my voice steady. "Ma'am, I can assure you this is my land. I have all the documentation." She actually let out a sharp, theatrical laugh that sent a few startled birds flying. "Anyone can claim ownership. Anyone can make up stories about inheriting property. Do you have documentation with you right now? Can you prove it this instant?" I gestured toward the cabin. "The papers are in my house, which is right over there, because I live here." She scoffed. "Anyone can rent a place and pretend to own it. I'm Tiffany Albright, president of the Crescent Lake Preserve HOA, and I know every property owner in this area. You're not one of them." The audacity of being told I was trespassing on my own land by someone who hadn't bothered to check the boundaries was astounding. I tried one more time to de-escalate. "Mrs. Albright, I understand your concern, but I can easily prove ownership. If you'd like to walk over to my house, I can show you the deed." She crossed her arms and shook her head firmly. "I'm not going anywhere with a stranger who's refusing to leave our community property. If you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." "Ma'am, you're welcome to call the police. They can verify my ownership just as easily as you can." I figured that would be the end of it. No reasonable person wants to waste law enforcement's time over a simple property dispute. But Tiffany Albright wasn't reasonable. She pulled out her phone and, without breaking eye contact, dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious man lurking near homes with children," she said, her voice dropping into a concerned, frightened whisper that was completely manufactured. "He's refusing to leave our community property, and he's been sitting here watching our neighborhood. I'm afraid he might be dangerous." I just stared. She was lying to an emergency dispatcher, twisting a man fishing into a sinister threat. The casual way she weaponized fear and twisted the situation into something sinister was breathtaking. As I listened to her declare war on me, I knew this wasn't about fishing anymore. This was about power, and she had just picked a fight with the wrong person. Monday morning brought Sheriff Cole to my front porch. He was a solid, middle-aged guy with the look of someone who had seen every flavor of small-town nonsense. He asked me to temporarily stay away from the lake to avoid further disputes, just trying to keep the peace. I agreed, knowing my compliance was temporary. An hour after the sheriff left, I found a bright yellow HOA violation notice taped to my door. Notice of trespassing on community property. Fine, $200 per day until violation is corrected. Scrawled in red ink at the bottom. Second notice will result in immediate police involvement. T. Albright, HOA president. The sheer gall of fining me for using my own property was the final push. I stopped being polite and started being meticulous. I spent Monday morning tearing through Walter's old filing cabinet. He was a pack rat with a lawyer's mind. I found folders dating back decades, and finally, in an envelope marked Lake Property, I found the deed, dated 1985. Walter Nelson had purchased 45 acres, including the natural lake and all surrounding territory. But the real shocker came when I spread out the survey map. I traced the property lines with a finger, checking and rechecking the boundaries. This couldn't be real. The property line extended well past the immediate cabin area. According to the survey, the entire Crescent Lake Preserve development was built on land that belonged to me. My hands were actually shaking. I owned an entire neighborhood. The woman who had been screaming at me about trespassing was living on land I technically owned. I started laughing. That low, choked, hysterical laugh that comes when the absurdity of reality completely breaks your brain. Suddenly, Walter's cryptic words came back to me. Some battles aren't worth fighting until you have to, Sam. He had known. I dug until I found the answer in a folder marked lease agreements. Back in 1987, Walter had leased the land to the development company. The terms were clear. The developer could build, but the original property owner retained ownership of the lake and the right to access it without interference. Most importantly, the lease could be terminated if the terms were violated. The peaceful retirement I'd planned instantly evaporated. This wasn't just about fishing. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fact that Tiffany had been harassing the landlord on his own property. I wasn't just the victim. I was the guy holding the lease termination clause. While I was processing this, Tiffany was busy spreading her narrative. I watched from my kitchen window as she talked animatedly to various neighbors, pointing toward my house. By Monday afternoon, people who used to wave now crossed the street. Tiffany's campaign of character assassination was working. The irony was beautiful. Here was Tiffany, standing on my land, telling my tenants that I was trespassing on my own property. It was like watching someone build a sandcastle, convinced they had found the perfect spot, not realizing the tidal wave was coming in. Mrs. Higgins, a sharp 71-year-old neighbor, showed up that evening with cookies. "I remember when your grandfather dealt with troublemakers before," she said. "Tiffany tried this exact same thing back in the 90s. Took Walter 3 months to get tired of her nonsense." "What happened?" I asked. Mrs. Higgins chuckled. "Same thing that's going to happen now, I expect. He let Ruby make a fool of herself, documented everything, and then one day, he invited the whole neighborhood over for a barbecue. He spread out all his property documents for everyone to see. Poor Tiffany went white as a sheet when she realized she'd been harassing the landlord. Looking at that survey map, I smiled. I was going to let her keep digging that hole until she couldn't climb out. Tuesday evening, the absurdity peaked. I watched Tiffany organize an HOA security patrol. 6 residents, folding chairs, clipboards, walkie-talkies. They set up a checkpoint between my house and the lake with handmade signs. Community property. No trespassing. On my property. Tiffany was directing them like a general. Remember, if he approaches, don't engage directly. Document everything and call for backup immediately. Backup for a guy who wanted to fish. I decided to test their resolve. Around 6 p.m., I walked out, fishing gear in hand, moving slowly toward the lake. The reaction was immediate. Tiffany jumped up, waving her arms. "There he is. This is not a drill." She stepped directly into my path. "Sir, you cannot pass this point. This is private property belonging to the Crescent Lake Estates community." "Miss Albright," I said patiently, "you're absolutely right. This is private property." She nodded triumphantly, completely missing the implication. Finally, some recognition of our rights. "Now, please turn around and leave immediately." Just then, Mrs. Higgins sauntered up. "Tiffany, Dear, she said in a tone dripping with historical context. Didn't you learn anything from the last time you tried this? Your grandfather was so patient with her, she continued, looking at me. She organized patrols, called the police. He just smiled and let her exhaust herself until she was ready to listen to reason. I noticed the patrol members were shifting uncomfortably, whispering. Doubt was being planted. But Tiffany, predictable as ever, doubled down. She launched into a rallying speech about not letting outsiders intimidate them. I realized she wouldn't stop until she had created something so dramatic that backing down would be impossible for her ego. So, I nodded to the patrol. You folks enjoy your evening. I'll be inside if anyone needs to talk. And I walked back to my house, leaving her standing there, mouth open, presiding over her fake border control on my land. Thursday morning, Sheriff Cole returned. Mr. Nelson, I need to talk to you about a formal complaint that's been filed. Tiffany had claimed I violated a non-existent restraining order and demanded my immediate arrest. She's created an official record now, the sheriff explained, tiredly. I have to investigate this properly. Tiffany arrived 10 minutes later, trailing her entourage, folder bulging with evidence, photos of me fishing, witness statements, and a timeline of events making me sound like a spy. Sheriff Cole listened patiently, then turned to me. Mr. Nelson, do you have any documentation regarding your property ownership? I handed him the deed and the survey map. He verified them against the county database on his phone. Mrs. Albright, Sheriff Cole said finally, this documentation appears to be legitimate. Mr. Nelson owns this property according to county records. Tiffany went through several violent color changes. That's impossible. Those documents have to be forged. She immediately went off the rails, pulling out her phone and making calls to the sheriff's supervisor, and then to a local news station, loudly threatening lawsuits for police misconduct and failure to protect the community. Her behavior had become desperate and unhinged. After she stormed off, Sheriff Cole stayed behind. Mr. Nelson, your documentation checks out completely. You own this property, including the lake. But she's created an official complaint, which means I have to follow procedures. My advice, document everything she does from now on. Something tells me this isn't over. I knew she was about to give me the perfect opportunity. She wanted a public forum? I'd give her one she'd never forget. Monday of the following week, a local news van pulled up to the Crescent Lake common area. Tiffany had organized a press conference to expose the failure of local law enforcement. I watched from my kitchen window. Tiffany was dressed in her navy blue blazer, positioning herself as the brave community leader. She gathered 15 residents behind her, who looked like hostages shuffling their feet. The performance began. We are being terrorized by an unstable individual who refuses to follow community rules and threatens residents on a daily basis, she announced, her voice trembling slightly. I timed my entrance perfectly. I walked out of my house at a casual pace, carrying my folder of documentation, positioning myself at the edge of my property, fully visible to the camera. There he is. You can see how he lurks around watching us. Tiffany shrieked. I waited until she paused for breath. Excuse me, I called out in a friendly voice. Could I provide some documentation that might be relevant to your story? The news reporter immediately perked up. Tiffany went red. Don't listen to him. He's manipulative. She then announced the community was prepared to take direct action if law enforcement wouldn't protect them. We will form a neighborhood watch that operates 24 hours a day. We will document every movement this individual makes, and we will make sure he knows that we are watching. The reporter, smelling blood, asked the question that would later define the story. Miss Albright, you're talking about organizing round-the-clock surveillance on your neighbor. Are you aware that he claims to own this property? Tiffany sputtered. He's lying. Anyone can claim anything. Just as she demanded my arrest on live television, Sheriff Cole's patrol car pulled up. He saw the cameras and knew the score. Tiffany pointed at him. Sheriff Bradley. Perfect timing. These cameras need to record you arresting the man who's been threatening our community. The moment of truth had arrived. Sheriff Cole stepped forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Albright, you have made multiple false police reports, organized harassment campaigns against Mr. Nelson, and publicly threatened to conduct surveillance on a property owner who was simply trying to enjoy his own land. These actions constitute criminal harassment and filing false reports. Tiffany shrieked in denial. This can't be legal. We have rights. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm for the camera. Mrs. Albright, you do have rights as tenants under the lease agreement my grandfather signed, but you don't have the right to harass me on my own property. Sheriff Cole pulled out his notepad. Ma'am, Mr. Nelson has the legal right to ask you to leave his property. You can leave voluntarily, or I can escort you off the premises. Tiffany looked around frantically. Her remaining supporters were avoiding eye contact. Several had already quietly walked back to their homes. I decided to offer her a way out, a chance to stop the damage and establish boundaries. Miss Albright, I don't want to have anyone arrested or evicted. I want to be a good neighbor, but that requires mutual respect. I'm willing to work out a new agreement, but there need to be some changes. What kind of changes? She asked, her voice shaky. I pulled out my prepared paper. First, you need to resign as HOA president immediately. Second, you need to publicly apologize for the false accusations and harassment. Third, the new HOA leadership needs to sign an agreement acknowledging my property rights and lake access. Sheriff Cole cleared his throat. Miss Albright, these terms are more than generous. I'd strongly advise you to accept them. Her shoulders sagged in utter defeat. I resign as HOA president, she whispered, and I apologize for any misunderstandings about the property ownership. Sheriff Cole nodded. Mrs. Albright, you are no longer welcome on Mr. Nelson's property without explicit permission. If you violate this condition, you will be arrested for trespassing. Is that understood? She nodded miserably and began the long walk back to her house, followed by the silent retreat of her few remaining loyalists. The news reporter wrapped up his story with interviews from Mrs. Higgins, who gave a particularly entertaining soundbite about young people needing to learn respect for property owners. 3 months later, life had settled into the peaceful routine Walter would have approved of. The new HOA president, a reasonable man, signed a formal agreement. Tiffany Albright quietly sold her house and moved away, realizing living as a tenant on land owned by the man she had harassed wasn't a long-term option. Most mornings, I still sit by the lake with Walter's old fishing rod. The peace I'd been looking for finally arrived, and it was better than I'd imagined. Sometimes the best victory isn't destroying your enemy. It's teaching them to respect boundaries while building something better for everyone. So tell me, if you discovered an entire neighborhood was illegally built on your inherited land, what would you have done? Would you have immediately served eviction notices? Or would you have used the situation to force a community agreement? Is there ever a justification for HOA presidents using harassment and false police reports to exercise control? Let me know your stance on property rights, boundaries, and community conflict in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it, because sometimes the biggest battle you fight is over the smallest piece of plastic on your own land.